Were there any difficulties that you faced in the war? Just personal experiences, anything that happened?
Well, you know, just going to boot camp, straight from having had a sort of sheltered upper middle class existence of was quite a shock. You know, I don't know how much you've read about Marine boot camp, but even for the women, it was pretty tough. And we had what they call DIs, drill instructors, who were old Marine regular officers, sergeants, most of them, who resented the fact that women were in the Marine Corps in the first place. I mean, that was a terrible shock for you know, a real Marine who had been in the Marines before the war. The idea of women being in the Marine Corps. Now, your generation can take that, you know, of course, we can be in the Marine Corps, we can be in the Army, and women go into combat, but that was totally foreign to the culture in the country at that time. So, you know, I had to learn to stand there and take it with some guy about this far away from me yelling at me at the top of his lungs. But I was young, and I was in good physical shape. I played tennis all the way through college, so I'll have to say that I enjoyed almost every minute of the time I was in the Marine Corps.
Nice. Were there ever any times that you wanted to get out of the Marine Corps? No,
not until the war was over. When the war was over, it was sort of as if the whole purpose of the point of being in it in the first place was over. We've done it now. So everyone I knew was anxious to get out as soon as we could.
Are there any specific stories that you have of boot camp, or like what kind of drills did you guys do? Was it like physically difficult, or?
Well, yeah, boot camp was difficult, particularly for people who were not in good, you know, who had not been athletic or weren't in good shape, because we had obstacle courses to run, and they were physically demanding, but not in the sense that the boot camp that the men went through was. All of it was just a little bit less demanding, and so it was not something that you couldn't handle. Although I didn't really realize until I got in officer training school, not very many people, it seemed to me, washed out of boot camp, although I'm sure there were some. But once we got into officer training school, it was almost as if they were trying to wash you out, to be sure that whoever was left was, you know, exactly the person they wanted to be an officer in the Marine Corps. And in the movies, they have the person who is washed out up in front of the reviewing stand or something, being told they have to go home. But during the war, what happened was you would just wake up in the morning and go to class, and all at once you would realize that someone that had sat next to you was not there any longer. They were just gone. So after a couple of weeks of that, there was a little bit of tension. I mean, I at least began trying really, really hard, because I was determined to make it, because you knew that, you know, these people that were disappearing, it was because they had washed out of officer training school. And then there was some funny things that happened. After I got my commission and came to California, I was the officer in charge of an office, and I had, I don't know, 8 or 10 enlisted women under me. And the funniest thing happened. One girl was going home on leave, furlough, to her family in the Midwest somewhere. And what we did back then, the airlines, commercial air travel wasn't really that prevalent back then anyway. And during the war, no one could really get on a commercial airline if you weren't in the Senate, or if you weren't a high-ranking officer, if you didn't have some really important business. So what we'd do if we had leave was to hitch or ride on a military aircraft. And that's just the way you got around the country. And the disadvantage to it was that you had to check out a parachute before you left, and lug the parachute with you everywhere you went, and then bring it back and turn it back in after you came home. So I walked in the office one day, and I knew that this girl had been home on leave, and I said, well, how did you do? Did you have a nice trip? Oh, yes, I had a wonderful, wonderful vacation with my family and all. And I said, well, how about the flights? Did you have any trouble getting flights? Because sometimes you'd go to a military base and wait for a long time to get a flight to wherever you were trying to get to. And she said, oh yes, ma'am, it was really nice, except for having to parachute out. And I said, what? What do you mean parachute out? Well, they had gotten somewhere over the desert and had in a fairly small Navy airplane, and the pilot had to land to refuel, and he couldn't lower the landing gear. So he circled and circled and circled, and finally he said, well, I think the safest thing, instead of making a wheels-up landing with everybody on board, is for everybody to bail out, and then I'll land the airplane. And so they all had to jump. And she had never jumped. I mean, we did not have training in parachuting from airplanes. But she made it okay and didn't even sprain her ankle. She was very cheerful about it. I never did have that experience, thank heavens.
So what was it like interacting with new people that you had sort of just met, and like going through boot camp with them and people like that? What was that like?
Well, you know, it was interesting. There were people from all over the country. It was totally different from anything I had ever experienced, because I had grown up in a small town and knew everybody, and everybody knew me, and even when I went to college, it wasn't that far away. Here, particularly after even in boot camp, there were a lot of women in there who had worked in factories, for example, whose parents had worked in factories, which was a totally different experience for me. But somehow, perhaps because of what I mentioned earlier about the feeling of unity that really characterized the country in those days, we were all in it together, and we made friends very easily, and it was good. It was a very, very good experience.